look at how we purchase anything, you immediately look at price. What I believe is you need alignment with that person, and that's built on a foundation of trust. Some buyers will ask you for a discount simply because it's perceived as a little bit too expensive for them.
How to know when to negotiate in the sale. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. I'm Kyle Racki, CEO of Proposify.
I'm Evan Santa, Vice President of Sales.
And we're sharing what's working in sales right now. Evan, why does negotiating too early kill deals?
Very simply, a lot of times your buyer is going to try to negotiate too early in the process. Usually a buyer will start to ask about cost and pricing and the details around that before they've really made a decision as to whether or not they want the product or service. What happens is sales reps start to get excited about the idea of like, ooh, this is a buying signal. This buyer is going to want to close. And the most veteran salespeople will actually fight against that and start to do a little bit of discovery on, are you actually ready to negotiate? So for instance, a buyer says, well, what is this going to cost me? And when can I get started? And what does that look like? You need to first check in and say, hey, we can talk about that. We can talk about pricing and onboarding and costing. But from there, just want to ask, like, are we ready to do that? Like, have you made a definitive decision that this is the right product for your business?
I experienced that actually a couple of weeks ago on a sales call that I was attended with one of our reps, where the buyer was saying, you know, what can you do on price? But she had questions about the product and whether or not it would work. And that was one of the things that I had said on it, which I learned from you was, hey, let's not talk about price right away, because let's figure out if this even works in the first place for you, if this is actually going to be the tool for you. And it actually really helped guide the discussion, so we weren't wasting a lot of time talking about price when she's still evaluating.
One of the biggest questions you can ask yourself is, when I have a buyer ask me about price, and then they might ask for a deal. They go, can I get a discount? And you give them that discount. But then all of a sudden the deal stalls, and that new potential customer doesn't actually sign on. And they all of a sudden start asking questions about the product or service again. That's one of the biggest indicators that that specific deal and prospect wasn't ready to yet negotiate.
Yeah, and why do you think people do that? You know, like from a buyer perspective, if they're not even sure it's going to work, why do they even start talking about price and what can you do about that?
Your buyer is trying to control the sales process. They very likely have gotten to a bit of an awkward stage where they don't know what else to ask. So what's the biggest thing that they can ask when they're thinking about purchasing something? What is it going to cost me? But again, that's where you need to really evaluate your sales process and the amount of information transfer that you're providing to your buyer so that they can, again, get to that definitive decision as to whether or not the product is right for them. But it is so natural for a buyer. When you look at how we purchase anything, you immediately look at price. Think of an instance where you're at the grocery store. The price tag is right there. And a lot of times before you decide, do I even want this item? It could be something as simple as coffee. You look at price as part of the qualifying factors to whether or not you want it. You buy something actually because it's inexpensive. So you go, I don't know if I necessarily want that coffee, but it's $4. I'll take it. But if that coffee is $20, then you go back to the product. You might pick it up and look at it and say, do I actually want to spend $20 on this? The problem here is that when you're at the grocery store, it's very different than purchasing a product or service. And essentially, buyers will have the same behavior of asking price to see if that will help them decide that they want the product or service. For example, somebody building a deck at your house, it's going to be fairly expensive. It's going to cost you thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars. But a buyer saying, well, what is this going to cost me? Even if it was at a discounted rate and the contractor said, this is going to cost you $6,500. Well, that's actually not that inexpensive, even though it's inexpensive when it comes to decks. So I think, again, that's a good example, because then all of a sudden they go back to evaluating the product and service, and the price actually didn't have them say, okay, sign me up.
What are the things that you teach reps that you bring on about how to handle negotiation? So outside of, okay, the buyer is at the stage where they have made a definitive decision that this is the tool for me, and now it comes down to not just price, but sometimes other variables within the contract. It could be start date, it could be what's included. What are the kind of things that you would train a rep on in terms of how to handle negotiation in a very professional manner?
Yeah, again, I think it's all about buyer alignment. That's what we talk a lot about with our team. It's about, and I do this all the time. It's like aligning with your buyer, not doing this. And what I believe is you need alignment with that person, and that's built on a foundation of trust, and trust comes from you being a resource as a salesperson to your buyer. So delivering information that is required for them to, again, come to a definitive decision that they want a product. And then, again, you need to qualify your buyer. Like, are you at that point where you've made a decision that this is the right product or service, but now we need to figure out, is pricing going to work? And if that's the case, then boom, now we're in the negotiation stage. Great. And that's where you need to, again, qualify the deal, qualify the negotiation. We're no longer qualifying, are you right for a product or service? Now we're qualifying, what is it going to take for us in order to get this done? And that's where, again, you need to approach it in alignment with your buyer, not in conflict. Essentially, work with your buyer to understand what they need to do in order to purchase. And then when they do ask you for a deal, then you can ask a question back, is to say, well, if we're going to talk about discounting in any regard, or adding additional services at no cost in order to create more value for you, you need to understand from the buyer first and foremost, is this about cost or is it about value? And that's one of the most important parts, because some buyers will ask you for a discount simply because it's perceived as a little bit too expensive for them, or maybe they're trying to fit it into a budget. And you hear that, a good indicator of that is them saying, for instance, this product is priced at $10,000. And they say, hey, if you could get this down to like $9,000, I think we'd be able to move forward. That's a good indicator that this is about the total cost. But if they just ask you for a discount and don't say, like, can you get it here? That's where you need to start asking them, is this about your perceived value of the tool or service or product? Or is this just about it being perceived as too expensive? Because on the latter side, some people say this isn't necessarily about cost, but like, what can you do for me? And they're just sort of asking that. That's where a lot of times when you look at your cost of goods sold and your margins, it sometimes is more preferable to both parties for you to provide additional services. So again, you think about, again, the example of building a deck at your house. If they were to say, hey, you know what? I can't do anything on price. It's going to cost you $15,000. I'll stain it for you at no additional cost. And a lot of times, again, that's going to provide more value without you essentially discounting the deal, right?
I've heard you talk before about there are some buyers who just want a discount because they want to feel like they've won something. Talk about that a little.
A lot of businesses or business owners or salespeople don't like the idea of their customer winning. If you think about how that pertains to a discount specifically, a lot of times we sort of think to ourselves, you know, they're just asking for a discount because they want to win. It's okay to have your customer feel that way. There's actually nothing better than your customer having a win. So sometimes we will provide a discount, again, in alignment with when can you sign by, when can we solidify the deal. So that's our ask. But a lot of times, just a few $100s off a product or service can have that customer say, I got to win. Now, here's another scenario. Whenever you're dealing with a buyer who has to go up the chain in one way or another, so even our dynamic, right? If I go purchase something for our business, I'm usually going to come to you and say, hey, Kyle, this is what I'm dealing with. This is why we need it. Are you okay with that? A lot of business owners say, sure, Evan, that's great, but go ask for a discount. And now I have my boss who says, go get a discount. So I go to a sales rep and say, hey, what can you do for me? This is also something that's very valuable to understand. The most common discount in our industry is 20%. So when you go ask a sales rep for a discount, just because my superior asked me to go get a discount, a lot of times those sales reps will cut the deal down by 20%. But when in fact, a lot of times a 3% discount will get it done.
All right, so just to summarize, what do we want people to remember?
Most importantly, you need to take away the idea that when a buyer asks about price, they might not have yet made a definitive decision that your product or service is right for you. So you need to almost pause for a moment when they do ask, like, what is this going to cost? And you're going to say, hey, do you have any other questions about the product or service before we talk about cost? And a lot of times they will have additional questions, and that's a great indicator that you made the right move. Second thing is, it's okay to give your customer a win. Sometimes they just want to feel like they got a deal. You'll notice this with buyers who kind of just ask, like, very, very much at the end of the sales process to say, what can you do for me? And finally, don't negotiate against yourself. Wait until a discount is asked for or there's some hesitation on pricing before you even start to do some discovery around it.
Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see more videos like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button and we're coming at you with more sales content every week.